Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Breakthrough to Creativity Show. I'm Jean, and I'm interviewing experts from around the world about how to get to a place where inspiration flows naturally through you and how to make a living from your natural gifts and talents. So today I'm interviewing Tristan Taormino. She is an award-winning writer, sex educator, speaker, filmmaker, and radio host. As a speaker, she's widely regarded as an expert on a diverse range of topics, from sexual empowerment and LGBTQ sexuality to non-monogamy and feminism. She's the creator of Sex Educator Bootcamp, a professional training program, and she runs a coaching and consulting business for sexuality and creative professionals. So, Tristan, you're very welcome to the show today. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited. I get asked to do summits all the time, Jean, and I mostly have to turn them down. But after I checked you out, I was like, no, I want to do this. I want to talk to Jean.
Awesome, awesome. Well, we're delighted to have you here. So, can you tell us a little bit about how you got started in your field?
Well, I think writing was always a passion of mine. I just didn't think it was a job. So I feel like I made a pretty coherent plan when I was in college that I was going to go to law school. And then I got rejected from every law school I applied to, and I had to do something else. And it was one of my mentors who really encouraged me to write and to put myself out there and to take a year and just kind of figure out what I wanted to do. And then the writing led to me teaching mostly workshops on sex and relationships in the beginning. And I would get up in front of a room full of people, mostly strangers. I would talk about something very taboo. And it sort of hit me like, this is where I'm meant to be. I'm not nervous. This feels really good. It clicks. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is my calling.
And it all took off from there.
Well, with tons of hard work. Everyone is always like, what's the secret? And the secret is an insane work ethic and doing so much work in the beginning, which you hopefully then reap the rewards of as you get farther into your career.
Absolutely. And so, you mentioned that you were encouraged to write. So, could you tell us a little bit more about that and how you developed as a writer?
Yes. So, I mean, I can remember writing stories, writing poems, writing plays from the time I was very young. My mother was a writer, and actually, she was an English professor very briefly, and then mostly did technical writing. So she was writing like books on how to put together a washing machine kind of thing. My father was also a writer and wrote plays and essays. My uncle is a novelist. So I do feel like a little bit that it's in my blood. And I moved to New York City as soon as I graduated college. I started writing and I started going to every writing event I could. Open mics where there might be 5 people or 50 people, listening to other people's work, going to conferences about writing, taking writing classes with writers who I admired. And because I lived in New York City, a lot of this was accessible to me. Nowadays you can take online seminars, so you don't even have to be in the same place as the person. But I feel like those early years, I just wrote and wrote and wrote, submitted my stuff, got rejected, wrote some more, read my stuff out in public, and developed a kind of a creative writing community.
That's awesome. And so, was it like a writer's circle that you were a part of?
I mean, it was looser than that, but it's like you begin to see the same people. If you're at that point, if you're writing about sexuality issues, gay and lesbian issues, it's like it's the early 90s, so it's not like on every corner. So you end up all going to the same events and networking and then connecting and then kind of keeping in touch about all your projects.
Sure, yeah. No, that's cool. Yeah. So then when we talk about your coaching business, so just to kind of shift gears a little bit, and so when you're sorry, my cat is chiming in here. When When you work with clients who would like to find their passions and their values and their mission, I suppose, how do you can you tell us a little bit about how you approach that, I suppose? Where do you start with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, I think we have to acknowledge that we all have passion inside us, right? And so part of it is actually asking lots and lots of questions of people to kind of get to the heart of it. Because they may start out and say, I'm a blank, or my art is about this. And then you get to know them and you ask more questions, and you sort of uncover what might be underneath kind of what they think is their mission, their vision. There might be another vision there as well. And I think, we all suffer from, now my dogs.
So you've got the dogs and
Sorry,
I've got the cat over
I
here, so
know. Can I start in the middle? I can start in the middle. Okay, sorry. Um, let me, this is usually where they stay quiet. Guys, come on. Please behave. Mommy's working. So in terms of unlocking their passion, I feel like I do a bunch of exercises with them. I ask them a lot of questions. I try to get to the heart of what makes them really sing, what brings joy to them. And also, I feel like it's important to give people permission to be as specific as they want to be. I do feel like sometimes people want to kind of please everyone, right? And so they're thinking in terms of their audience before they're thinking of themselves. And they're like, okay, I want this to appeal to a mainstream audience, people of all genders, people of all backgrounds. And I think it's okay to be really specific and sort of hone in on who you are, what you're about, and then we can talk about figuring out how to find those audiences for you. But I think if you try to please all the people, everything gets diluted.
totally, I totally agree with you on that. And what are your thoughts about, I mean, the relationship with, I suppose, doing something that might be considered crowd pleasing? Because I mean, a big part of this show is, I suppose, the place of the world in our art. And so sometimes, even though we want to reflect things, in the world, we also want to, be funded for our art, be paid, and all of that. So there is that relationship, and what we're creating has to also generate income. So,
Yes.
I mean, what are your thoughts about that relationship? I mean, yeah, I'd be really curious to hear.
I mean, this is the classic intersection of art and creativity and capitalism, right? And so, whether or not I would like to dismantle or destroy capitalism as a whole, that's not going to happen right now. It's probably not going to happen in 10 years. And so, I have to work within a system that we're all working in, which is capitalism, where money is what people are paid and money is what people use to survive and live and thrive, right? So we do have to make certain choices, right, about what we're going to put in our work and what we may hold back or leave out. And I think that that's up to the individual for seeing kind of who your audience is, what platform you're on. For example, as a sex educator, no sex educator can advertise on Facebook. This is a known thing. Facebook will not accept any ads. If the word sex is in it, or if they just go to your homepage and know you're a sex educator, they'll deny you. So that's difficult, right? Then you have to sort of get creative, because that is one way of advertising to a lot of people. So I think you have to think about what platforms you're using, what's appropriate, and then figure out where you're ready to maybe let go of some things, and where you have a hard limit. Where you have a hard limit, like, I do not want to leave this piece of the puzzle out. I don't want to leave this language out. I don't want to leave this imagery out. And it's a delicate balance. I think it's probably the hardest thing that all creative people do, is figuring out how to make a living doing what we love.
Couldn't agree more. And I mean, I love to explore the topic. I mean, obviously, because this is my second series in it. You know, but just like that place of the world, you know, in our creative projects, because it's not just about getting paid, but also how we reflect back, you know, our experience of the world, and also, and ultimately to, you know, to engage with it. You know, there's no point having, oops, there's no point doing art if, you know, if nobody
Sees
is
it.
seeing it, you know,
Yes. I
or
have a
experiencing it.
I have a quote. I can't do the exact quote, but I have a quote in one of my presentations, which is that if you've created something that you really believe in and that you feel is unique, it's actually mandatory for you to share it with the world. You cannot keep it to yourself. If you have created, please put it out in the world. But I think it's difficult for people. And I also think, you know, I've always thought that I am in the field where we talk about the most taboo issues there are, sex. But actually, there is one topic that is more taboo to talk about, and that is money, right? There's a lot of silence around money, what your rates are, what you're getting paid, what you're not getting paid for, how much you make. People are very secretive and silent about this. It's quite taboo to bring it up. And that all kind of keeps us in our little corners, isolated, not quite sure what to do. I feel like the conversation around money has to expand. We have to be willing to kind of break that silence and talk about it so that someone who's, you know, 15 years younger than me says, I want to do some college speaking gigs. What do you charge? Right. And asking, you know, letting artists talk to artists about what they price their things at, who they give discounts to, if it depends on the venue. And I think those conversations are still not happening enough. And also the idea of assigning value to our work. I think that in many cultures, but certainly in the United States and Canada, more so in the United States, art is not valued, right? Artists are not valued. Artists are not paid what they're worth. They're not prioritized. They're not celebrated. They're not thought of as heroes. And so you can internalize some of that, right? You can internalize some of that and think, okay, maybe this isn't as valuable as someone doing brain surgery or someone working to get something to Mars or whatever it is, right? We internalize the society placing not enough value on our art. And then we think, okay, I can't charge very much for this, or this isn't worth that. I think that's a thing that I work with a lot of people on in my coaching is developing a sense of value and worth and knowing that they can put a number on it. They can be wildly creative, and this could be their life's work and their calling in life, and they can put a price on it.
Totally. And I love where you're going with there. And if you know, I'm hearing you right, it's also about self-worth and, you know,
Absolutely.
that value that like if we can't even we judge ourselves by how much we're actually willing to charge for our own art, or,
Yes.
you know, whether we insist about being paid.
I think this is especially true for people who are socialized to be women in our culture because we are taught that the way to be sort of a good girl is not to be too loud, not to be too opinionated, don't brag, don't talk too much about yourself, you know, don't be selfish. And so all of these elements that we actually need in order to market our work are things we've been told are bad for us to do. So a lot of people need to like get through the barrier of imposter syndrome, of thinking they're not good enough, this isn't perfect enough, why would anyone want to see this or buy this or use this? And we have to break through those walls and know our own value. And I think some of it first is internal work. Before we put a price on it, let's do the internal work so that you can say with gusto, my work has value.
Yeah, no, I think that's fabulous, and I'd love to hear. I know, like you do so much powerful work with people in tapping into this, and not just that, but I suppose building that foundation when they're uncovering their passions and their vision for what they want to create and their mission. Would you be able to share with us maybe any success stories or people that come to mind that they really kind of found a surprising path open up before them after kind of doing that kind of deep inner work that's so valuable?
I worked with a couple who wrote a book together, and they're also sex and relationship educators. And I knew them because they're sort of in my larger community, their peers, their colleagues. And when we got into these sessions, they seemed very resistant to promoting their own work, right? So I would be suggesting, this is how we use social media. Now you have an email list. Let's send them some things to your email list. This is your core fan base. What about events, right? I'm just throwing out all these strategies. And they pushed back. They were very resistant. So then I realized, okay, I've gone to like step 2. We need to go back to step 1, which is, why does this make you uncomfortable? Why are you pushing back against promoting yourself? And then they would slowly reveal that they thought that they were bragging. They thought that it made them sound self-centered. They thought that like telling people about your work is just like so selfish and annoying. I mean, all these ideas, like all these psychological ideas, that they just didn't want to be that person. But I said, but how else are you going to figure out how to tell people what you do, right? We have to tell people what we do. You can do it in a really obnoxious way, or you can do it in a way that it totally aligns with your values and totally reflects your voice, right? Because everyone's got a sort of different voice and personality. So I'm not saying there's one way to do it, but you have to do it. And you have to believe that doing it is valuable and is important. And in order to do that, you have to know, again, your inherent value. And you have to know that talking to people about your work is not a bad thing.
Yeah, no, I think that's all so true. Yeah. And so, did you just find that just talking to them about that was sufficient,
Yeah, and
or
it felt like the tools came later, right? And so then when I got feedback from them, they were like, actually, we thought we were going to get all these tools, right? How to manage your email list. And we did later on. But in the beginning, we actually identified psychological blocks that we didn't even know we had, right? And I think, that's kind of the interesting thing about resistance, right? When we resist ourselves, or when someone else resists something, there's a moment there to kind of lean into it and be curious about, why does this feel uncomfortable? Why don't I want to do this? Why am I not confident to do this? And get a little bit below the surface, because then ultimately, when you're ready to do it, you're going to be so much more effective because you believe it, and people can sense when you believe in yourself.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and you just attract so many different things to you than if you're trying to hide yourself, right?
Right.
Um, yeah, no, absolutely. So, when you're talking about helping people to tap into their creativity and their authentic creativity, could you share maybe some suggestions or tips for anybody out there who would like to be more creative?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I love to do, and I really encourage people to do, is just do a mindfulness practice. I mean, going outside in this world is full of stimulation and full of surprise and full of inspiration. You just have to slow down and listen and watch and feel it. We often kind of run through the world trying to get to our next appointment, trying to get our next thing done, meet the next deadline, and we don't just like stand in nature and listen to the wind or stand and smell the flowers. I feel like going out in the world and then being incredibly mindful, saying, I'm going to now try to identify all the different sounds I hear, or all the different birds I see, or all the different street art I pass by. It brings you into your body, and it also begins you a practice of noticing the richness and the detail of life. which I think is very inspiring. I also think we have to constantly remind ourselves to listen to our inner voice. I think sometimes when we say, I'm not feeling productive, or I don't feel inspired, I don't know what I want to paint, I don't know what I want to sing about, I don't know what I want to write about, you have to challenge that a little bit. Because I think we are taught in all sorts of circumstances not to listen to that inner voice, not to listen when our instinct, our gut is pointing us somewhere, right? When something keeps coming up, or you keep seeing the same thing, or you keep thinking of a similar idea, you have to listen to that inside yourself. I think people sometimes dismiss that, right? Or they don't trust the inner voice. I want you to trust the inner voice. And then I think, many writers use this practice, and it's certainly helpful for me, which is every single day to have a daily practice. So a day does not go by that I don't sit down with the computer, no distractions, for at least 1 hour and write. And sometimes I'm writing fragments of words. Sometimes I'm writing lists. Sometimes I'm writing a story. Sometimes I'm writing like a whole really coherent narrative, but I've got to write. And then if it's like not coming out, I'm still devoting that time to it. And having it regularly happen, it just becomes a habit. Today is my day to write because every day is my day to write. It's always on my to-do list, write. And I always spend at least that 1 hour. And I started this with 10 minutes. You can start a daily practice of this for 10 minutes and then, work your way up to however long feels right for you. But I think mindfulness, daily practice, listen to your inner voice.
That's really helpful. I must say, in my experience, and doing a daily practice, like you say, I'm also an advocate of that. And I've discovered recently that it's actually so much easier to, for all the excuses that we make to not do it, whether it's to do some painting or to do some writing. It always comes down to it's actually so much easier to do the daily practice because it comes naturally to you anyway. You want to do it, but then sometimes we find excuses where we're not going to do it. We're too busy, or it's not that important. I should be cooking dinner for my family, or I should be doing this, that, and the other thing. But actually, but then having that internal chatter is so much harder than just to do it and to, and pat yourself on the back. And so that's been an insight of mine recently.
And do it and give yourself permission to fail. Do it and say, I'm going to produce something that's crap. You know what I mean? Do it and say every single day doesn't have to make like the most wonderful creation in the world. Sometimes it's simply about the practice and about putting pen to paper or whatever your art is. So I totally agree with that. You just have to do it. And it sounds so simple, but trust me, I've been in those phases where I can come up with a million reasons why I can't do it.
I totally agree. I agree. And I love that. I love what you're saying about just giving yourself permission for it not to be perfect. It might mean you don't spend an hour and a half drawing or whatever, but it's just you're still putting pen to paper, and just by that alone, you've won the day. So I think that's a really valuable takeaway. I think for any budding artist out there. Have you ever experienced like a creative blockage or a writer's block or anything, Tristan?
Oh my God. So I'm coming out of a several year writer's block. So my last book came out in 2014, which is now 5 years ago. I have started on a new book, but I was definitely in a blocked place for those 5 years. And I am used to sort of churning out a book every year or every other year. So it was really distressing to me, and it made me really anxious. For me and this particular block, it was about fear. It was like, this is the place where I'm the most vulnerable. This is a place I haven't shown to the world yet, even though I'm a public figure and people know a lot about me. This is the place that scares me. So I can think of a million reasons why I don't want to write about this. let's write about that. Oh, let's do that. Let's write about that. And so it took some time for me to finally give myself permission and support and say, this is going to be hard, but it's worth it, and you're going to do it.
Yeah, I must say I commend your bravery because I think coming from that kind of place, that's the struggle that a lot of people feel when they're especially trying to do a new project or they've been dreaming about doing a project for 20 years.
Hmm.
But and it's just to finally get over that. And so can you share with us if you don't mind, like how did you eventually get over that
Yeah.
fear?
So one of the ways that I got over it is the thing that I'm working on now is a memoir. It's my first memoir. It's not what I'm known for in terms of writing. I'm known for educational stuff. And I began reading every memoir I could get my hands on. Whenever anyone recommended a memoir, I got that book and I read it. And that also became a daily practice. Each night I read for about an hour a memoir. And it was really inspiring because when you read memoirs, all of a sudden you see, well, first of all, how people write about difficult, hard, sometimes awful, and very dark things. And they survive, right? They wrote about this thing and they survived. So I can do it too. And then you begin to see how people organize their thoughts, what's important, how they respond to their memories, how they structure the book, right? So then I begin to kind of record all of this in my head. What of this do I really like? What of this I wish it was organized a different way? This doesn't make sense for me. This is something I could see this if I tweaked it a little bit. And so going to the genre, right? Going to the genre, reading memoirs if you're working on a memoir, going to look at other people's art if you're an artist, listening to other people's music if you're a musician. For me, I find great inspiration there because it also gives you the sense of, I can do this, because we really all have all the fears and all the anxieties, and we do need to push through them. And when I read about other people's stories and think, wow, this must have been hard, this chapter must have been hard, this whole book must have been hard, it gives me inspiration that I can do it.
Yeah, I've heard that before, that other people say that they feel a safety in the structure of the book as well, that somehow things are contained uh,
Mm.
in that
Oh,
structure as well. Would you agree with that?
well, this is fascinating, okay? Because I am a real type A personality. I'm very organized. I begin every day with a to-do list. And this is like, it's like in my brain. I mean, this has been since I was little, right? And I have worked on the 8 books that I've written, and I've edited 25 anthologies. I've always had a clear table of contents, structure, title, subtitle, breakdown, sidebar, the whole thing planned out, right? That is my work, that is my process. For this, I've thrown it out the window. I've thrown it completely out the window. I think if I start structuring the memoir, I'm going to get bogged down. I'm going to avoid writing, and I'm going to get real nitty gritty picky about all the organization of it all, which I love and can really get deep into. So I've given myself permission to just write every day. I don't know if this is a chapter. I don't know if this is a story. I don't know if this will ever go in the book, but you have to write something. And so the whole thing is a mess. I've never had such a messy process in my life. It's like there's these files, and there's this one file recently. I was looking for something that I'd written, and I named the files, right? And so I was like, I can't find this thing about the beach house. The beach house. Where's the beach house? And then I find it in a file called like Red Hook, Brooklyn, where I had started writing about Brooklyn, but then I somehow went into something about this beach house. And so it's such a mess. It's literally the most disorganized thing I've ever done in my life. But I think it's right for me right now that it's messy and it's not contained, because I can organize it later. I know how to organize. I know that's one of my strong suits. I know that's one of my skills. I know I can do it. The thing that's blocking me is the writing itself. So I'm allowing myself to just be messy and just like vomit it all on the page and figure it out later.
I love that, and I love the mess. I mean, because I think even on one level, I think you know where everything is, even though there's, it seems disorganized. There's probably a part of you that knows what's written down and what still needs to be written down as well. So I think that that actually sounds beautiful in itself, as a creation. So that sounds really
It's
cool.
just so different for me that it's taken a bit of like learning and letting myself do it, right? Because I'm usually really organized.
Yeah. And so, speaking of books, and about like inspiration, I suppose, what books would you recommend for inspiration or to unblock creative flow? Do any come to mind? What would
Yeah,
your
but
favorite?
they're kind of strange and probably not the traditional books that, because there's a million great books about writing, right? There are. My books are a little off the beaten path. I practice Buddhism and I follow this American Buddhist nun named Pema Chodron. And Pema Chodron has a book called The Places That Scare You. Now, it's not about writing per se, but it's about identifying the places that scare you and becoming curious about them and leaning into them. And so, because I'm someone who's like working with difficult material that scares me, it actually scares me, reading that book and rereading it helps me get closer to leaning towards it rather than turning away from it. And then the other book I just reread is actually like a young adult. It's actually like a tweens book. It's not even young adult. It's sort of younger. It's not a children's book. It's kind of in between. It's called Tuck Everlasting, and it's by Natalie Bobbitt. It's a classic. I mean, it's been around for decades. The thing about Tuck Everlasting, there's a few things. One is it reminds me of my childhood. It was one of the first books that I like read and really reread and like really got into. And it's it has these like pretty simple, straightforward messages about magic and about life and about love. And I feel like sometimes we have to go back and access that kid, right? The kid who literally I would do a thing like I would write a play and I would go like to school the next day and I would like round up people at recess and be like, we're doing this play. Now, if I said I wanted to write a play, I'd have all these doubts and fears and be like, no, there's all these great playwrights. I've never written a play. That's the craziest thing. So if we can tap back into that place where we had less fear, right? The place where everything seemed possible, everything seemed endless, our creativity wasn't kind of stymied by expectations about what we're supposed to do, about doing things that are going to bring in good money and give us financial stability, right? We were in a place as kids where anything seemed possible. And I like to try to go back to that place and just even capture like a little bit of it.
Yeah, no, I love that. In fact, yeah, and definitely, I've got one coming to mind as well from my childhood that I'm thinking, I wonder can I get that from the library? And I'll see can I
Oh,
get my hands on a copy.
yeah. I mean, it's nostalgic, but also, it brings you back to a place where, we've gotten jaded, and we've gotten far away from creativity and from our passion. And sometimes you need to sort of go back to the beginning.
Totally, totally. So, Tristan, before we move to wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like to add and share with our audience today?
I mean, I think that as someone who's a writer and has written professionally, for me to tell you that I've had a 5-year writing block and I got out of it, hopefully inspires some people, because I think we have to know that we're not alone in these processes, and we have to know that we can do it, right? That we can do it. And I felt for so many years I couldn't possibly do that. I could do anything but that. And so, yeah, so I hope I'm just an example of someone who people may look at and be like, she's had a certain level of success, she's produced all this stuff, and yet she still had a major creative block, and it lasted for a while. And I finally came out of it.
Yeah, no, that's completely inspirational. Yeah, no, it's wonderful. And I know you have a free gift for our audience today. Could you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yes, so I do a coaching practice for sexuality and creativity people. So people in especially kind of offbeat professions who don't have a traditional kind of 9 to 5 job, who are creating their job as they go along, and are often entrepreneurs, are often self-employed, and are doing things kind of outside the box. And I'm offering a free 15-minute phone consultation, either by phone or by Skype, to everyone who's listening and watching.
That's very generous of you. So I always think it's so generous for people to give up their time. So thank you so much for that. And where can people find you online?
Well, I'm pretty active on social media. And so Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, I'm just at Tristan Taormino across all platforms. I have a website, tristantaormino.com, or they can go to their favorite place where they get podcasts and they can download my podcast, Sex Out Loud.
That's brilliant. Tristan, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you, Jean.
Okay, thanks everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye.